Um, this is the wonderful opportunity to have another paper on the break. Robin Speed, her paper titled, Where Are You From and Who Are You Now? Place and Identity, and Katherena Vermette's the book.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming today. I'm very fortunate. Jade and I had every intention of communicating about what we were going to say to make sure that we weren't reinventing the wheel or duplicating our ideas. We didn't, and I'm actually very grateful that she made reference to some quotations and excerpts that I had to cut from mine, so you got the context that I need now. So anyone who knows me well will tell you that I love meeting people and hearing their stories. I take after my mother in that regard. What's your name? Where are you from? The question, where are you from, is key. A person's place of birth, the place in which they grew up, is not only a foundational part of their story, but it also causes others to draw conclusions about them as a person. Trust me, I grew up in Walden. My studies in Indigenous literature classes have taught me the importance of positioning oneself, how my journey to who I am now can affect my perspectives and contribute to biases that need to be acknowledged in order to interact with texts or people respectfully. I have also learned a great deal about how, for many Indigenous people, the land of their birth and growing up influences their identities and positions perhaps more than the average settler could possibly realize. Katherena Vermette's novel, The Break, is a story told in many voices, set in a particularly significant setting. It is a story about a heinous crime and how a family supports each other and survives this event. But it is also about the stories of the individuals who were all affected, the stories of how they came to be the people they are. Vermette's characters are representations of different urban Indigenous experiences and of the many factors that contribute to the person we become and the choices we make. One of the most influential of these factors is family and significant relationships. Another is land and space. Setting this novel in Winnipeg, Manitoba is crucial to the plot and to the characterization Vermette creates. However, this space is also crucial to the conflicts and themes that Vermette develops. Shining a spotlight on Winnipeg permits Vermette to expose the many interrelated issues and challenges facing an Indigenous person in this urban setting. But she is also able to pay homage to the strengths and resilience of many of its Indigenous inhabitants, and the beauty and healing that can come from supportive relationships. In my capstone paper, I examine the characters of Stella and Phoenix, and consider what they tell us about how identity is shaped by relationship to land and people. Both of these characters are molded in various ways by their relationship to the land of Winnipeg, Manitoba, its people and systems. And both of these characters find an element of healing through relationship and through connection with who they are. Through them, Vermette demonstrates that one can be shaped by their relationship to place and people in innumerable ways, and resilience and strength of identity can also be derived from these very same sources. In 2015, Maclean's magazine published an article series examining racism in Canadian cities. One of the articles is called Welcome to Winnipeg, where Canada's racism problem is at its worst. In it, Nancy MacDonald illuminated the depth and breadth of racism in Winnipeg and the enormous social challenges present in the city, especially the region of the North End, wherein The Break takes place. In this article, MacDonald emphasizes the poverty of the North End, home of the country's two poorest postal codes. She identifies evidence of social issues, dropout rates after grade 9, percentages of children apprehended by Child and Family Services, and prevalence of substance abuse. These descriptions paint a vivid, if one-dimensional, picture of the home of Vermette's characters in The Break, and of the challenges faced by many growing up in this urban setting. And these descriptions also contribute to a certain stigma surrounding places like the North End. That is, these spaces become constructed in social psyche as hopeless spaces populated by hopeless people. Identifying Winnipeg's North End as a stigmatized space provides insight into the characters' complicated relationships with this land. Aside from having a genuine relationship to the space in which they inhabit, they must also contend with maintaining their identities in relation to this construct of stigma. However, Vermette's characters and the many ways in which they inhabit the space of Winnipeg provide rich depth that humanizes the near stereotypical descriptions in the article. While her illustration of the North End of Winnipeg in the novel is unapologetic and real, Vermette also recognizes the importance of connection to land and space in forming one's identity, even when that space is one of social, economic, and historical conflict. Stella is a young Métis mother who finds herself living once again in the North End after having moved away years before. Although the storyline that drives the plot of The Break surrounds the rape of a young girl and the causes and effects of this event in relation to all of the characters, it is Stella's story and character that cuts through every avenue from Selkirk to Layla, like the hydro-claimed land known as The Break. Vermette's depiction of Stella's relationship to all of the characters involved is like this pathway, connecting all of their individual stories and experiences. When her mother, Rain's spirit, introduces both The Break and Stella simultaneously by saying, "My Stella," she named it The Break, she thought that she should call it something. The reader is immediately made aware of the personal connection Stella has with this land. Naming a space signifies an attempt to claim it or mark it as belonging to oneself in some way. But then, because of the violence of the opening scene, which takes place in The Break, the reader begins to infer that Stella's developed relationship with this land, as well as with the larger region of the North End, is conflicted, violent, and fearful. The Break takes on an oppressive role in Stella's relationship with this space. While anyone would be enormously affected by witnessing such a crime, for Stella, this event triggers layers of emotional trauma, guilt, fear, and loss. Her almost obsessive connection to the place of the crime, coupled with a series of painful or fearful memories that surface through that connection, illustrate that she sees The Break as representative of all of the North End and of her deep yet conflicted relationship with that land. Stella's inability to look away represents her failed lifelong attempt at distancing herself from her relationship to this space. Her eventual failed attempt to escape this space, to sever her relationship to that land by moving 2 buses away as soon as she was old enough, resulted in estrangement from her family, her kukum, her aunties, her cousins. Years later, she hesitated when her husband wanted to move back to Selkirk Avenue, back to the North End, and only acquiesced due to her passive position in their relationship. Stella's complicated relationship with the North End of Winnipeg is evident in the fact that as she navigates the neighborhood on her way to reconnect with her kukum, she relives fearful or violent memories. This is the place where she and her cousins were stalked by a man in a car when they were children. This is the place where her best friend Elsie was gang raped at a party. This is the place where her mother died of violence and institutional neglect. Rain had died because, as Kukum had said, well, she was there alone and danced with the wrong fella. He was mean to her. Of course, the truth of Rain's death is more complicated than that. Rain was attacked by a white man she picked up at a bar, beaten badly in his truck without ever leaving the parking lot. The attack went unnoticed, as did her escape to the hospital, where the nurse rolled her eyes and told her to wait, thinking she was just drunk, had made her own head injury. Disoriented, Rain left the hospital and died of exposure in an alleyway. When Stella was able to learn the details of her mother's death, she concluded that her mom wasn't a person anymore. She was a story, and it all didn't matter anyway. Stella's learned shame resulted in her also blaming her mother for her own victimization. Her mom was dead, and it was all her own fault. For a long time, that was all that mattered. And yet, it is Stella's reconnection to her family and her kukum's house that helps her to overcome these perceptions of the North End as only a place of danger, loss, and dysfunction. She is reminded of the strength of relationship, of how these relationships and memories of family also contribute to her sense of self. She has spent such a long time resisting her connection to the space of the North End. Moving back caused her to confront her initial tendency to define herself as a potential victim, which resulted in her need to also eventually define herself as a protective mother in resistance to the dangers of her space. But her family belongs to this space. Her family reminds her that she is also defined by her relationships to these people, particularly these women. Staying at her kukum's house, Stella comes to a realization that she has sat silent for years. She left her family, moved in with a man who didn't ask questions, and was just silent for as long as she could be. She thought that she could heal there, but she was only resting. She was only standing still, waiting for the real work to begin, waiting till she found the words. Once she begins to see herself in a more holistic way, in this perfect, imperfect home in the shadow of her mother's face, she realizes that for the first time she feels she is exactly where she is supposed to be. In a dream, she sees the land of the break, the site that she had thus far associated with trauma and all of her negative relationship with the North End, as a pathway north, the direction of healing, spiritual health, elders, according to the teachings of the medicine wheel. In her dream, she commits to walking towards her fuller identity, rooted in her family, and it is her ability to embrace this land that leads her there. In his critical essay, Go Away Water, Kinship Criticism and the Decolonial Imperative, Daniel Heath Justice, a Cherokee author and literary nationalist, defines and explores the concept of kinship criticism, tasking the reader to recognize the honor the many complicated relationships represented by the work. More than intersectionality, Heath Justice calls for criticism that speaks for the fact that Indigenous literatures are alive, and that draws people together in powerful kinship. In analyzing Vermette's characters, Heath Justice's kinship lens enables the reader to recognize the interrelationships represented through their interconnected storylines, and to draw conclusions that honor the similarities of experience and the universality of one's involvement with the broader family of indigeneity without compromising the differences that make one unique. Phoenix Stranger is the female character that contrasts those of familial connection in the break, and yet she does indeed have a poignant relationship to her victim's family. Phoenix Stranger, who is aptly named, is established as a child conceived through rape, the illegitimate daughter of Elsie, Stella's closest friend. Vermette draws further attention to Phoenix's interrelationship with Stella when she crafts a parallel plotline. Stella and Elsie went to a party together where Elsie was gang raped, resulting in the conception of Phoenix. And years later, Stella's niece, Emily, goes to a party where, witnessed by Stella, she was attacked and raped by Phoenix. In thus positioning Phoenix in relation to Stella, Vermette tasks the reader to consider their kinship, the similarities and differences of their experiences as significant representations of the varied experiences of Indigenous women. Like Stella and like her mother Elsie, Phoenix began her life as a member of a multi-generational Métis family. Phoenix remembers a stable household, proud and loving, and she remembers being her grandma's favorite. Phoenix remembers living in a big house in the projects with her mother and two sisters. There she remembers their last happy Christmas. The girls were taken away before the snow melted. And similar to how Stella blames her mother for the circumstances leading to her death, Phoenix blames herself because she should have known not to wear her mother's too large sweater to school. She should have known the sweater would slip, revealing the bruises from Elsie's abusive boyfriend. She concluded that the intervention of Child and Family Services was therefore her fault. While Stella had a mother who struggled with drug and alcohol abuse, as did Phoenix, Stella was never abused, as far as we know, nor was she removed from her household and placed in foster care. The fact that Stella had a stable family circle to support her and her mother emphasizes the vast difference of experience for Phoenix. From the first intervention, Phoenix was not only removed from her mother and her home, but also from her sisters. Cedar Sage and Sparrow went to a home, but they didn't have a place for Phoenix. So she was stuck in a hotel with older kids. The three sisters are never truly reunited, nor are they returned to their mother, for while Elsie was real good back then, when the girls left, she got real bad. This implies that her daughter's removal actually contributed significantly to Elsie's collapse into addiction. Unlike Stella's conflicted relationship with the North End, Phoenix establishes strong connections to this space of the city, despite the many influences of also having grown up in this stigmatized space. And Phoenix also has some strong connection to specific places and houses, defining herself in relation to those places as they represent her roots and bonds with her family. Just as Vermette identified specific streets and landmarks through Stella's journey back to her family and to herself, she also does this through Phoenix's journey through the city. This technique situates both characters solidly within the real space of the North End and positions them as foils because while they are navigating similar routes with similar purposes, their relationship to the spaces are in distinct contrast. In this parallel journey near the end of the novel, Phoenix seeks out the brown house where Elsie, her mother, grew up. When she is expelled from her uncle Bishop's house, she walks up Main and turns onto Redwood and walks over the bridge. It all feels so normal, it's almost good. In her head, she's pretending she's just going home, her old house. Here, Phoenix recollects her childhood, reminisces about her sisters and her family. All of her stories are contained within the city limits of the North End. And as she gazes at her old house, Phoenix wants to pretend she lives there, that she has always lived here, and that she's just come home after a long time away. She can almost believe it. If she wasn't so cold, she'd believe it all the way. This is a poignant moment in the story, as the reader already knows that Phoenix is the perpetrator of a heinous crime, the person who so damaged a young girl and her family members, Stella included. And yet the author provides these moments of backstory and emotional responsiveness to complicate Phoenix's character, causing one to see her as more than just the ringleader of a bunch of violent girls, an attacker causing enormous hurt. Far from merely creating a sympathetic or apologist lens for analysis of Phoenix's character, Vermette simply acknowledges the truth behind Phoenix's whole self. Vermette bears witness to Phoenix's life,
gives her voice that illuminates her character beyond the surface identities placed upon her by others or by herself at other points in the story. It is significant that Phoenix's longing to be going home, her peaceful memories of her childhood surrounded by loving relationships, parallels that of Stella's. Of course, Stella can go home, while Phoenix has no real home to go to. Stella finds security and a reclamation of herself when ensconced within her childhood home, surrounded by reminders of her family and her roots. For Phoenix, this is impossible. It is a reality that has been denied to her through factors beyond her control, factors related to poverty, loss, intergenerational trauma, and even to her very birth through violent illegitimacy. And it is impossible for a thoughtful reader to not feel affected by the impossibility of Phoenix's longing to go home, to respond to the supposed hopelessness that envelops Phoenix's character. Phoenix is distanced from her sister, Cedar Sage, by the machinations of the child welfare system, and the death of her sister Sparrow is clearly still a raw wound. Phoenix is confronted by her mother once she has been arrested and incarcerated for the rape of Emily. At this moment, the contrast between Stella and Phoenix's family situations couldn't be more emphasized. While Stella is embraced by and responds by embracing her family, Phoenix is repulsed by her mother's futile grief, supposed weakness, and self-absorption. Vermette crafts this chapter using a non-linear timeline so as to interweave Phoenix's bitter relationship with her mother and the unfolding awareness of her own expected role of mother. Phoenix discards the past in rejecting her mother, but then Phoenix is seen to embrace her future child in a way that allows her to also acknowledge a more whole sense of self, consciously choosing an identity that contributes to her resilience. She moves her hand to her belly without even thinking of it, but keeps it there. And when the medical attendant tells her it's a boy, she couldn't have said anything even if she wanted to. But good, she thought. Good that it's a boy. He'll be strong. In a small way, Phoenix finds healing in the relationship with her unborn child. Perhaps it is significant that her child is a boy, as his gender ends the long line of women in Phoenix's family who were vulnerable and damaged, particularly because they were women or girls. And yet, as this chapter ends, Phoenix just squares her shoulders, sticks out her chin, tries to suck in her gut as best she can, and walks down the hall. She walks like nothing can get to her, like she doesn't give a fuck at all. Her maternal feelings suggest that she can care for someone else and perhaps grow as a person, but the persona she actively dons suggests that she has chosen an identity that matches others' judgments of her, and one which will permit her to merely survive. The reader is left with an image of Phoenix as criminal, hiding her identity as mother from the world. In an interview, Katherena Vermette said this about Winnipeg: "It's very much a home to me, and I like exploring all that murky, contradicting love that comes with home. Where we are and where we are from are such significant parts of ourselves." This is very true of the characters in Vermette's novel, The Break, and never more so than in the characters of Stella and Phoenix, positioned as very different characters in relation to each other. Through her depictions of these two rich and complex characters, Vermette unapologetically acknowledges all that murky and contradicting love that comes with home. Home is about both place and people. Through Stella and Phoenix, Vermette shows different perspectives on how one's relationship to place contributes to one's identity. But she also shows how family, relationships, and cultural roots build resilience and maybe even hope for